So we just wrapped up our external control of the gastrointestinal tract. And before we move on, I'd like to explain to you uh, where are these ganglia. I just wrote it down and didn't show it to you, so I apologize for that. And so let me just explain it to you now. So here are the ganglia. The sympathetic nervous system has a sympathetic trunk. So the nerves come down from the spinal cord and into this sympathetic trunk, which is like a highway. It gets on this highway and it goes to where it needs to go, and it could either go to the celiac ganglia, which is right here, or there's the superior mesenteric ganglia down here, and the inferior mesenteric ganglia down here. So there's three ganglia: celiac ganglia, superior mesenteric ganglia, and inferior mesenteric ganglia down here. And you can see that the celiac ganglia is large. There's a lot of nerves that are synapsing in this area. And then you can see that it shoots out, the postganglionic nerve shoots out and goes towards the lower part of the esophagus to the stomach and to the intestine and all the way down towards the colon. But and then that's where your inferior superior mesenteric um, ganglia starts to take over towards in the intestine and in the colon, and the inferior mesenteric is chiefly in the latter half of the colon. And then you can also see the striatal muscle being innervated by the sympathetic, as well as down here in the parasympathetic down here too. So we just finished. So we just finished the parasympathetic and sympathetic uh, innervation of the gut. Now we're gonna move on and move and talk about this lower half. This is the meat and potatoes of the gastrointestinal tract, the enteric nervous system, which has more neurons. There are more than 100 million neurons, and that's more than our entire spinal cord. Uh, our entire spinal cord does not have nearly as much as the neurons. So let's think back to our the histological features of the histological feature of the GI wall. I remember. Do you remember when I talked to you about the myenteric nerves and the submucosal nerves or plexuses? Well, we'll see that they also have a pattern in how they run throughout the gastrointestinal tract. We see that the in blue is the myenteric plexus, and we see that they run. It runs the entire length of the gastrointestinal tract. And that makes sense because the myenteric plexus sits between the circular and longitudinal smooth muscles, and it innervates those musculature. And we have muscle throughout the intestinal tract that helps in moving food and in digesting food and also again moving through the entire system, pushing it through. On the other hand, on the other hand, let's do a different. We have a different pattern for our submucosal plexus. The submucosal plexus starts at the duodenum, right after the this is the pylorus of the stomach, and that's where the food exits the stomach and enters the the duodenum, the beginning of the intestine. And it starts at the intestine and then it goes down, follows the track. You see that This is the pattern. And submucosal plexus, as we call that, it helps in the mucosal structures, the glands and secretory and the villi. It innervates those types of uh, processes and structures, and we have more of that after the food has been digested and is ready for absorption and more processing. So that's after the stomach. So again, right here we see the submucosal plexus right here, the myenteric plexus here. So this is the submucosal and the myenteric. And it's important to realize that all the parasympathetic nerves do not directly go to the epithelium or any of the other effector systems in the enteric nervous system. So it's an indirect pathway. It has to synapse with one of these ganglia before it can move, before that signal can move even further and onto the effector system. Uh, the sympathetic as well, but there are some that go straight. And sensory neurons, of course, come back out. They go to the They could either go to the ganglia and the central nervous system. So your brain could get gain information, what's going down in the gut, or the information go to the ganglia, the submucosal myenteric plexus for uh, automatic reflexes or autonomic uh, programming. So let's talk about the activation of myenteric plexus. The activation of the myenteric plexus. So remember, it's in general, activation is caused by the parasympathetic nerves. So we see that the activation of the myenteric plexus, which is the musculature of the gastrointestinal wall, it increases tonic contractions. It increases the intensity of rhythmic contraction, and also increases the rate of rhythmic contraction. So it increases the tonic contractions as well as the rhythmic. In rhythmic, it increases intensity, higher intensity, and higher rate. And then activation of the submucosal plexus increases increases secretory activity and increases and modulates the endocrine activity. and modulates blood flow. If I could spell. So you can think of this as parts. These activities are both required for digesting your food and absorption and moving your food, the food and or as we call it, the bolus through your gastrointestinal tract. And so contractions help push the food through. Intensity, if it requires more push, or the rate, this that will help push the food, the bolus through. And the secretory activity will increase enzyme secretions and hormone signaling, and that's where we get the modulation of hormone signaling, the endocrine activity, and blood flow. Again, you're gonna provide blood flow because that brings hormones in, signaling to the gastrointestinal epithelium, and also bring nutrients out and into your body. But it's very important to remember that the autonomic nervous system, for the most part, and especially the parasympathetic, do not directly innervate the effector system, the epithelium, the muscles. It must synapse at the plexus before that signal can move further. So of uh, here's a picture of what I just described. So we have a parasympathetic preganglionic nerve fiber. These are the ganglia. This is the myenteric plexus. Plexus or ganglia are the same right here. So this is a ganglia right here. And here's the submucosal ganglia right here. And then we see the information, the nerves, the signal comes down, and then synapse. If it's synapse in the myenteric plexus, then that signal comes down. Synapses here. Draw a check. And then it goes, and then it could either go further down, upstream or downstream, and then onto the effector system, which in this case for the myenteric plexus could be the longitudinal muscle or the circular muscle, which is closer to the lumen. And you also see a hormonal extrinsic control coming from a blood vessel and exerting control on the synapse at the myenteric plexus, and that could also uh, affect um, the contractions of these muscles. We also see how the parasympathetic information could come down and could go on to the muscles, or from the myenteric plexus could go down and synapse on the submucosal plexus. And then that information could go further down and onto the effector system, like the epithelium. This looks like it's uh, these are affecting the secretory and endocrine cells. This looks like a gland here and in the mucosa and the submucosa. And then these are sensory cells. Here, sensory cells from the epithelial wall will come back up and travel up to the nervous system, central nervous system, or might be contained within the enteric nervous system as a self fulfilling kind of program for like reflexes or coordination. You don't think about digestion. You don't have to tell your body to digest. It takes care of itself. So we're gonna wrap up our introduction to the enteric nervous system and the gastrointestinal tract. And this is the this is a big overall picture of what's going on in the system. So we see there's the enteric nervous system. We see that there's a brain. We see, of course, you have a brain, and then you see there's effector systems, and then that we will see have an effect on gut behavior. So we have three types of neurons in the enteric nervous system. There are the sensory neuron. There are sensory neurons. There are the interneurons. These are relaying information either downstream or upstream in the gastrointestinal system, and within the enteric nervous system. It does not leave. Uh, that information does not leave. And then we see the motor neurons. So the sensory neurons could either send two pathways. It could either send a signal uh, to the brain, so it could go back up to the brain. Your brain will process that information, and then it could send that signal back to the enteric nervous system. Again, it's an indirect pathway. It has to synapse with um, uh, with the ganglia before it affects exits into the effector system. So then we have or the sensory neurons could send the signal to the inner neurons, and this will relay information to the motor neurons. And we see that the inner neurons have they will have effect on reflexes. They'll have an effect on the program library. Like I said, the enteric nervous system is like a program. It has everything it needs to run. And it's like a library because it has different types of functions, and it could carry those out by going into its library and picking out that specific uh, program to run, either to flush if you have a bacteria, you eat a bacteria, or you have an upset stomach, you need to flush that system out. You need it's called a flushing effect. You're pumping, your parasympathetic starts increasing, and these neurons, the sensory neurons, maybe it's not even a parasympathetic, it's the sensory neurons are telling from the epithelial wall you detect a bacteria or something harmful, and it goes to the interneurons, and then they go into the program library and initiate reflexes and a flushing motion, and that might include uh, increased motility and increased secretion of enzymes and majority maybe water, and that would help in flushing whatever that's harmful in your gastrointestinal tract out of your system, out of your body, and that's why you maybe have diarrhea. And of course, the other thing is information processing. Information processing. And then this information goes to the motor neurons, and this kind of wraps up our enteric nervous system. And then we see that information going onto our effector systems. And oops, these include muscle, muscle, the secretory glands I showed you before, as well as the circulatory patterns, like the vascular system, the blood vessels. We talked a little bit about that before as well. So so we see that the brain is only a modulator. It's external to the enteric nervous system, and it's not initiating or ending a process because the enteric nervous system is continually working, but it's modulating. The brain will send increase this activity, increase your motility, or it'll say decrease that activity, and you'll decrease maybe your motility. So it's a modulator. So then we see that the effector systems are affected by the enteric nervous system, and it goes towards the gut behavior. And gut behavior include um, motility patterns, motility patterns, secretory patterns, or circulatory patterns. And that kind of wraps up our introduction to the gastrointestinal tract, and we'll see you next time.